Hello, hello. It's been a while since I did a solo recording. Took a little break for Christmas, and then I ended up getting super sick. And was off for a week, and then have just been catching up on life. But one of the things that kind of sparked my interest to do a solo, it was a really interesting conversation with some clients. There's the new Let Them book. It's not a new concept. I think there's a new book that's come out or something, where it's like, if someone doesn't like you, let them. You don't, it's not up to you to have to change their opinion about you, or just things that aren't in your control, to not worry about it and let people do them, and you just focus on you. But it was interesting because one of the people made a comment of like, well, that certainly doesn't apply to horses. And it just got me thinking of like, kind of in my world, like, no, I don't let them get away with murder, but I kind of follow the same thing in terms of um, let them explore. Even when I'm riding, like my mare tends to like drift off the rail a little bit, and like even my coach, like her kind of recommendation is then like, okay, well then ask her to leg yield. If you want to go that way, then let her, but make it me asking and her following my aids and my cues, and then we leg yield back over towards the rail or whatever. um but it just kind of comes back to the concept of people expecting their horses to be robots. And I understand that some horses have a job. I mean, like, my latest background with horses is a therapeutic riding setting where like they had to suppress all of their natural instincts, and no, you weren't allowed to let them, because they had a really important job. They had very precious cargo that they needed to take care of. But it was so interesting and fun and rewarding. Like when my late gelding retired from his job as a therapy horse, like I did let him get away with murder essentially, and it was so fun to see him kind of test those boundaries and realize that he was free to have opinions, and he was free to explore and question things and kind of and play with it. It was so fun to, oh, you're going to let me do that? Well, I've never been allowed to do that before. Like his biggest one, which drove quite a few people nuts, but I let him do it with me, is like after a ride, I would let him aggressively rub his face up against me, because historically, like when I was his like quote unquote trainer for his therapeutic riding setting, he wasn't allowed to do that, because he had a job and this is working, and he needed to be on his game and kind of not put a foot out of line. So it was so fun for me and for him to be like, yeah, bud, go for it. Like, let me help you scratch that itch. And it was just really fun. And it's fun to like all within reason. Like I was talking to another client yesterday, and like when it comes to my personal safety, I I'm a positive reinforcement. I would call myself a little bit more of like a gentle force person, but I also have like a very strong foundation of my personal safety. So if my like it bothers some people, but no, if you've threatened my personal safety, yes, I'm still not against giving a horse a smack, and that might bother some people, and I'm sorry. But my safety comes first, and it for me comes down to horses don't speak English. So the smack doesn't come out of anywhere. It like I give you warnings, but no, if my safety and if you're causing me bodily harm, I that's a hard no. That's a hard no. I'm also like, for me, since GBS and like that, having that sensation of like being paralyzed, for me, the mounting block, like that is a very vulnerable spot for me, of like I have very high expectations of my horses. I'm not oh yeah, I'll get on while you're walking away. No, I need you to stand square. You need to wait until I'm on. When I'm ready, then we can go. So again, that's an example. I'm not going to smack a horse if they step away from it, but we work a lot of, here is the expectation that needs to be maintained every time. But I think that's also why I loved my session or my podcast with Steffi talking about it's just consistency. Like your no's always need to be no's and your yeses always need to be yeses. My expectation for the mounting block never changes. My expectation for Dickens, like you can rub on me once your bit is out. And I'm always consistent. And I think that's one of my biggest, I guess, flexes, if you want to call it. For all of my animals, I'm consistent. And certainly, this is why I've always I think I've mentioned, I don't listen to podcasts. And I used to have this theory or this problem or this issue that who do these people think they are to impede wisdom on others? And I think that was a huge part of my hang up for starting a podcast is it's so different. Talking about my medical story or my experience with anxiety or my experience with grief, that's so much easier for me to talk about because none of y'all can argue with me because that's my truth. That's my experience. You don't have a leg to stand on to argue with me, but it's a lot scarier. And my podcast with Lauren, we talked about this. So it's so much scarier to come in here with opinions based off of experience. But if someone else had the same experience, they might have different opinions. So I think it's so much scarier to come on here and talk about this is my belief of how this is how I am a horse person. This is how I present myself to my animals. And it's not me coming in here feeling superior or I have maybe a little bit of knowledge to share, but just potentially a different outlook. And it's more about this is how I like to present myself to my animals. And I would argue how I interact with humans too. It's super similar I've said to people in the past, it takes a fair amount to offend me. But if you do offend me, you will know. And same with my horses and interacting with animals on a daily basis. I have far more patience for animals to work through their anxieties, their hesitations, their shortcomings, whatever it may be. But don't threaten my safety. And it's so fun talking to other people in terms of I know quite a few dog trainers and horse people who kind of went from a historical horse approach of that I would consider quite harsh and with a lot of physical repercussions. And then I think some of us went to a hard spin around to only positive reinforcement. And I think there's a really lovely middle ground. Even with my younger dog, we've gone away from harnesses. We've gone away from regular collars. None of those were working. And we actually walk her in a star mark now, which is a version of a prong collar. And if you had talked to me 5 years ago and said I would be walking my dog in a variation of a prong collar, I would be so offended. And I can't do that. That's too harsh. But we've trained it. We introduced it to her super slowly. We taught her the expectation. And I still, when I walk her with it, I walk her with 2 leashes, which yes, is very complicated. She's a very complicated being. But I have 1 leash attached to the star mark and I have 1 leash attached to her regular collar. And I only use the star mark as a backup if my regular collar doesn't have enough juice. And again, five years ago, I would have been mortified that I wasn't walking my dog in a harness. She hates the harness. She gets claustrophobic and she doesn't like being restricted. So for her, the harness is more harsh and causes more anxiety and puts her on edge versus something just around her neck she seems to be totally fine with, but she doesn't like being confined. So it's finding that middle ground of working with your animal and trying to hear them and trying to see where their quote unquote shortcomings come from. Where's the root of it? What can we do about that? But it was just kind of interesting. There's just so much still of like like people kind of expecting their horse to be a robot or expecting it to be a dirt bike, where it's very much a prey animal. And even like Cashew, my mare, it was so fascinating for me. She unfortunately gashed her leg open a couple of weeks ago, like gashed, like borderline stitches. It was super deep, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't notice until I had her in the barn for almost like 10 minutes, because she walked on it super fine. She's a chestnut, like a liver chestnut. So like the blood was basically the same color as her leg. So it wasn't until I squatted down to take a look at her leg and like just clean up any of the mud that I noticed that she had a wound, a huge wound. But she reminds me just a little bit more of like, she's a smarter crate animal. Like she didn't show any weakness. She didn't show any pain. And like, obviously she was in pain because it was very significant. Whereas like my gelding would have been like three-legged. He didn't really have any of those like natural survival instincts in him. Like he would have been over the edge dramatic of like, you might as well amputate. I can't possibly walk on this. And even like cleaning out her wounds, like it ended up looking like a little science experiment with how much it was oozing and fizzing. And she just stood there like a tank. Like she had a little nose wrinkle, but that was the only response I got from her. And like, she would have survived in the wild. Like she would have not shown any weakness, just sucked it up and moved on. I just find it so fascinating, the difference of, of that existence, and whether it's like, there's the ongoing argument of like gelding versus mare, blah, blah, whatever. But I do think it just kind of comes down to their experience. And it was really cool. We ended up having, Angie Arstone come out and do a animal communication. And I've had a few experiences with Angie that have just been absolutely wild. The first time we had her come out, I had her come out for Dickens, my gelding. And it was more, I didn't really believe that she could talk to animals. I was like doing it because it was a fun thing to do at the barn. And I was curious. But I was like, this lady can't actually talk to animals. And she can. I really now genuinely believe she knows things. She said things that she shouldn't have had any business knowing, especially because she's not necessarily a horse, like she's not a horse person. So like some of the things that she would say, she doesn't know what they are. And you just kind of have to decipher what she's talking about. But the one thing that meant a lot to me, so I had Dickens done a couple of years ago before he passed, and then I had Cashew done, and I was really curious for her because she's new to me. I've only had her since September, and it's almost February now, but I've put in a lot of work to get to know her. She also makes it very known. She's a chestnut mare. Her every little thought and every little feeling is very much present. So I don't usually have to guess too much what she's thinking. But just kind of going back to the working with your horse, it meant so much to me, both of those readings for both of those horses. They have said that they felt very respected and very heard by me. And that's what I want. That summarizes what my goal is as a horse person, as an animal person, is I want them to know that I am doing my darndest to hear them, to work with them, not against them, and that I respect the hell out of them. And that with horses, their respect, they start with it and they typically keep it. Where I would argue over the years, my view for humans is the opposite of no one starts with respect for me, that's earned. And I always find it interesting, like people's perspective of that, of like, oh, we start with respect and it's up to them to lose it. I wouldn't say that I'm like that with people at all. You start with nothing and you earn every ounce of respect. That it's up to you. It's up to you how much you get. Where all of my experience with animals, whether they're mine or not, they start with it and they keep it because they deserve it. even if they have a different outlook. But it was, so when I was sick after, I think it was like the first week of January or something, hell of a start to 2025. But with like, ever since COVID, I've been isolating myself Like I still wear a mask, just with all the things that my body has been through. Um, we, as in like me and my medical team, have been concerned what would happen if I did get a virus and my body had to work double time, the cost that would have on my body. So this was the first, like, I want to call it like normal person sick that I've been in like probably 7 years. Like I've had many other extreme medical experiences, but I haven't had like a cold or a virus in like, I don't know, 7+ years, because I've had full control over my environment. Yes, I work with humans all day, but like everyone's so respectful. If they're sick, if they've been around someone who's sick, they either don't come, or I have several clients who've gone back to masking, even though I haven't asked them to. I appreciate the hell out of it. But yeah, I haven't been sick like that in a million years. It sucked, first of all. Don't recommend. But I had a pretty high fever. And that's one thing that has always rung true for transplants. Like if you have a suppressed immune system, if your fever can't be controlled, essentially you end up in the hospital, IV fluids monitored closely. I was able to control it with Tylenol every 4 hours. But it like completely set off my anxiety around, is this going to be it? Like, is this kidney just going to have a complete malfunction after being exposed to a high fever, and like just the rest of my system really having to ramp up and step up? And so I had like I've had some rough, 2025 has been rough so far dealing with that. And then I hadn't gone out to the barn in like a week and a half because I was sick. And then literally the first day I went back for Cashew was the day she gashed her leg open. So I went from taking care of myself to then taking care of her. And I would say it was a fairly crippling anxiety. And historically, before I started therapy, I wouldn't say that I was an anxious person. I was just hella disassociated. And now that I've kind of learned how to be present with those feelings, it was a very foreign concept for me, to just be paralyzed with anxiety. And not know how to get myself out of that. So I had a therapy session. I went in for blood work, got confirmed that everything is looking status quo. Nothing's changed. The fever didn't leave any lasting damage. So that helped a little bit, but it literally wasn't until a couple days ago that I rode for the first time in like 3-ish weeks, 3 weeks, give or take. And literally the second I sat in the saddle, all of a sudden my anxiety's gone, my brain fog is gone, and like it just goes back to like that whole concept of like horses are mental health. Like I obviously need to do a better job of finding some other coping mechanisms where I'm not reliant on my senior mare to stabilize my entire nervous system. But literally ever since that, and then I've been able to work with her a little bit more, like my energy is up, my depression, my anxiety, like it's always going to be there. Like my biggest fear in life, which unfortunately is like, it's a very strong potential, but my experience with dialysis was just the worst thing ever, for me. And like, I know some people have, I know have chosen to stay on dialysis, which like, I cannot fucking comprehend. But for me, it was crippling, it took up so much of my life. And I have had so many medical complications over the years. I've been trying to like figure out why that's so much scarier now. And like part of it is because I've worked through, like, I think I'm on like 2 years of therapy now. But I've worked through that disassociation and now like sitting and experiencing things. But I've also realized, like, knock on wood, ever since GBS and all of that stuff, like life has been really good. And I've built a life that I have to be 100% involved in. I have two high needs dogs now. I have a horse. I have a business that like if I don't work, I don't get paid. I need to be involved in that. And I just have so much more to lose now than like previously there hadn't been big enough chunks of time for me to build that, like big enough chunks of time between medical disasters, for me to build a life that I want. And now I have a whole lot more to lose, and that is terrifying. So it's interesting talking to people about, like, one of the counters is like, yes, I could end up on dialysis tomorrow, but like a random person could also get hit by a bus tomorrow. And is there a big difference between the two? There's always, like, we don't know, which is terrifying and also comforting all at the same time. But it's yeah, kind of, again, like we can link that back to the let them theory of let my brain have that worry, but that's not a worry as of right now, and just trying to be present and trying to focus on the things that I can control. And one of the things that I have done to help myself is I started meeting with this woman. She's an MD, but she's also a naturopath. So she has that Western medicine training. And I've met with naturopaths throughout the years. I've met with holistic nutritionists, and like they know their stuff. They're fabulous. But I am just such a unique case that it's terrifying going into that approach if they don't understand my history and like truly understand my history, and understand that I'm probably not going to take the random herbs that they're recommending, because we don't know. And you can't promise me that it's not going to interact with the medication I'm on, because I'm not on regular anti-rejection meds. I'm on a different random cocktail that we've kind of put together over the years that, knock on wood, seems to be holding its own. But when I was meeting with this lady, it was on Zoom, and you have like the initial paperwork to fill out, and I wasn't thinking overly highly of her initially when I was filling out the paperwork, because there was nowhere to write out my medical history. There was nowhere to say 3 kidney transplants, blah, blah, blah. She just wanted a 4-day food log and my medication and supplements. And I was like, okay, well, like, that's pretty big. You might want to know what's going on with my body. So we logged into Zoom, and then I was like, oh, I should probably mention. She's like, nope, I don't want to know like any of your medical history. And I was like, it's pretty big. And she's like, nope, I don't want to know. And she started off the consult with, she wanted to see my tongue. So I like held my tongue up to the camera. She wanted to see my throat, kind of looking at my thyroid, and she wanted to look at my nails. And so she did those 3 things. And then she asked from that, she's like, how many kidney transplants have you had? I was like, come again? Because again, she had my med list, but she did, like, I'm not on normal obvious anti-rejection meds. I'm on some like random immune suppressants that is like actually meant for like arthritis. But she's like, how many kidney transplants have you had? I was like, 3. And then she's like, yep, no, that makes sense. And then she's like, did you have anorexia or bulimia when you were younger? And I'm like, I'm sorry, you can tell my eating disorder history based off of my tongue, my throat, and my nails. And she's like, yeah, there's like severe history of malnourishment. I'm like, well, shit. Okay, cool. But essentially she laid out my entire life story, like medical, like mental health, like my entire life story she laid out based off of my tongue and my nails. And like she acknowledged that it's likely scary for me, with so much to lose, to try new things and blah, blah. And she went through like my supplement list and my food diary. And she's like, I see what you were trying to do. Like, obviously you're failing a little bit because why else would I have reached out to her? But she even nailed, like, she's like, I'm assuming you like finally broke down and contacted me because your energy was really crappy and your hair started to thin and like your periods were really awful. And I was like, yes. How again do you know this from my tongue and my nails? it was wild. And like, so I went in kind of being like, oh my God, this lady's not thorough at all. She doesn't know, like, she doesn't need any of that. She literally can tell from my tongue and my nails. So I still go into those situations cautiously. And if she has, I just did the consult, and then I have my next full appointment with her this week to go over what her game plan is for me, because she even said like some of the nutrients that the supplements I'm taking, she understands like why I was just taking the wrong kind. And like I don't use it and it's very outdated, but like technically my degree is in nutrition, so I'm not completely inept of supplements and minerals and all that. But it was just really interesting. And like very like she's kind of like she's a genius little witch that like in like the best way ever, not in a disrespectful way. It was just really, really cool and refreshing and empowering. And she even said, she's like, you're not a complicated case. Come again, like at no point in my life have I ever not been a complicated case. Like I'm a very complicated case, but I just found a lot of comfort in that. And she works closely with a transplant unit in the city that she's located in. So she understands, and I felt really good. So I'm very curious to see where that ends up going. But between having kind of that anxiety brain fog lifted from my time in the saddle to working with her to do everything that I can to help myself, I'm really hoping to help ease some of that anxiety of not knowing what my life looks like or any of that. Not that any of us do, but in particular, I really don't. So it's nice to have some approach to control, and just doing everything that you can to help support yourself. And I know I talk to clients about that all the time. Easier said than done, but I do appreciate that practice what you preach approach and try to take that on when I can through my own practice. But yeah, there's your solo update of how complicated shit can get in 3 weeks. It's been fascinating and it's been fun, but that let them conversation was the first thing that kind of sparked this whole concept. And I do think that's an incredible concept to take and run with. But just knowing, like anything, like just knowing your why is this something that you're wanting to do? How does that affect you? And are you actually able to let that go and let them? Because it's easier said than done. But I would love to know everyone's opinion. Maybe that's a bold statement, isn't it? I am curious, like people's approaches with their horses, and how much that does reflect on your mental health and how you view the world and how you exist in the world and move through it with your equine partner. It's something, in my opinion, again, that deserves respect and deserves to be cherished. And I'm always very grateful that my animals feel that from me, but I would love to know everyone's approaches as well. I find it fascinating.